What's the craziest or most unexpected thing that you guys have encountered while trying to preserve a property?
Oh my gosh. So I've been doing this for over 20 years.
The Weekly Friedman, your source for the most essential information in the default industry, with your host, Adam Friedman.
Welcome back to the Weekly Friedman, your source for the most essential information in the default industry. One area that often flies under the radar, but is absolutely critical to the foreclosure process, is property preservation. Many people outside the industry have no idea what happens when a property falls into default. What rights does the mortgage holder have to secure the property? What obligations do they carry to maintain it? And how do we strike the right balance between the needs of the lender, property owners, and the surrounding community? I'm Adam Friedman, managing partner at Friedman Bartolo, and today I'm joined by my good friend, Kellie Chambers, president and COO of Mortgage Specialists International, or MSI for short. MSI provides a wide range of services to banks and loan servicers, and most relevant to today's discussion is an industry leader in property preservation. With over 20 years of experience in this space, Kellie is the perfect guest to help us break down this often overlooked but incredibly important topic. Hey, Kellie, how's it going?
Good.
Thanks for joining me. Very excited to have you on here. I know you have a lot of information to share, and you have some great experience, so I'm pretty excited. I appreciate it. So do you want to walk the audience through what property preservation means? I think a lot of people have heard the term, but don't really get what it is.
Yeah, great. At a high level, super high level, property preservation really is preserving and protecting the property value and being a good neighbor. Nobody wants to live next to that house that's abandoned with tall grass. So it's being a good neighbor. So banks and mortgage holders, or we refer to them as servicers, we use those terms interchangeably, they hire property preservation companies like MSI to take care of vacant and abandoned properties during the default cycle. So we're going out to the property, we're cutting the grass, we're winterizing the plumbing so that the pipes don't burst during the winter season, and we're the ones going out and tarping the roofs and taking care of the property after a storm goes through, like a hurricane or a tornado. So we're making sure that the neighbors aren't complaining about a blighted property next door.
It's interesting though, right? Because at this stage, when you're doing this for a bank or for a loan servicer, they don't own the property. Someone else owns it still, even though it's vacant or abandoned. Is it tricky to navigate what rights and obligations the loan holder has when doing this? Like, can you just do whatever you want to secure it?
So it is tricky. So you use two key words there, rights and obligations. And those are two delineations. So I want to start first with the mortgage document. The standard mortgage document, they vary slightly by state. Standard mortgage document itself gives the mortgage servicer rights. It gives the mortgage servicer permission from the borrower to preserve the asset. You know, if we look at the Fannie Mae standard mortgage document for New York, just because you're in New York, Section 9 has a provision stating, and I'm going to read it. It says, if the lender reasonably believes that I, the borrower, abandoned the property, then the lender may do and pay for whatever is reasonable or appropriate to protect the lender's interest in the property. I'm not an attorney. I'm property preservation and I cut the grass. But I am a homeowner, and I read this document, you know, as I signed the mortgage for my house that I live in, and I read this to say that if I walk away from my property for whatever reason, you know, divorce, death, I got to go take care of a sick family member, there's lots of reasons for default, that the bank has the right to step in and take care of my property because they have financial interest in my property. So they have rights to take care of the property because I signed a document just now saying I give them the right to take care of the property. Later in the document, it even goes on to say that the servicer will proceed to secure the property. And it says securing the property includes, but is not limited to, exterior and interior inspections of the property, entering the property to make repairs, changing the locks, replacing or boarding up doors and windows, and draining water from the pipes, so that the pipes don't freeze during the wintertime and burst. So these are all services that the bank wants to do if you walk away from your property so that their financial interest in the home doesn't deteriorate. And to be a good neighbor. Because if you're living next door to the property that's abandoned, you want the bank maintaining that property next door because your property value is also going to be affected if that property value decreases. So the bank wants to be a good neighbor. And in order to be a good neighbor, they want to protect their financial interest in that particular property. So the mortgage agreement that I sign as a borrower allows the bank to preserve that asset. And that's why the bank hires property preservation companies like MSI to preserve the asset. The other interesting word that you used when you asked me the question is obligations. So above and beyond the rights that the mortgage document gives the bank and the servicers to preserve that asset, many mortgages are backed by investors and insurers like FHA, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, Department of Veterans Affairs, and the USDA. All of those agencies, government agencies, have investor insurer requirements, or they're referred to as guidelines. And every one of those agencies says, bank servicer, if you discover this property to be vacant, you must secure the property and winterize the plumbing in order to preserve the financial interest of the property within X amount of days. And the number of days varies slightly, but it's never more than 15. So the bank has only a couple of weeks in order to get somebody out there to preserve that asset if the property really is vacant and no longer being maintained by the borrower. So there are rights and there are obligations, and it is tricky to navigate because the banks really have to go through a lot of hoops to make sure that the borrower really has walked away from the property, and that they don't have interest in the property, because nobody wants to walk into a property and find out that the borrower really is coming back the next day. It gets tricky for sure.
Does that vacancy requirement and the bank's investigation and that obligation make it a little bit easier for you to kind of balance the rights between the bank and the borrower? Like, in essence, if you know it's vacant, you could change the locks, you can protect the property. I imagine if there was a gray area and you weren't really sure, or if you didn't know if the bank was doing their proper diligence, you wouldn't really know how to proceed.
Yeah, our field vendors they go out and we do monthly inspections, and they go through a lot of due diligence checks at the property to verify occupancy or vacancy. And a property can be vacant but not abandoned. So people have a property and maybe they're just living out of state for a month or 2 months taking care of a sick relative, and they're paying the utility bills and the heat's running and the pipes aren't in danger of being frozen. The field vendors are knocking on doors when they're permitted to, the neighbors, trying to get as much information as possible. The property preservation companies, they're calling the utility departments. Are the utilities current? Are they being maintained? Is the heat on, or is the account way past due and in danger of being turned off? So there's a lot of due diligence that goes on to really determine, is it abandoned? Is there a need to walk in and secure the property? Because nobody wants to lock out a borrower in error. Lots of steps. You're talking to as many neighbors, police, firemen as possible. The mailman, is mail being delivered and picked up? Our newspapers being piled up on the front steps? And like I said, the utilities, and sometimes you're checking, routinely. You'll go back 3 days in a row at different times during the day, because, you don't just go between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. because a lot of people work. So sometimes you'll go at 7, 8 o'clock at night and see, are there lights on inside the property?
How does your job differ based upon where the property is located? Like, I imagine if something's in a city or it's in a rural area, things are a lot different, even how you're checking for vacancy. I don't know, like how do things vary across locations?
Yeah, it's a good question. Urban versus suburban versus rural areas, they definitely all have their different characteristics and each are unique. And the field vendors going to those properties are going to have different approaches for sure. The urban areas, they're not as safe as the suburban areas, and safety is a very big concern of the vendors in the field. Sadly, we've had bad crime and vendors shot at, and terrible things happen to vendors in the urban areas.
Crazy.
So those ones are challenging. It's not uncommon for the vendors to call for police backup and to be more hesitant and take larger crews and make sure that they're carrying like wearing uniforms and presenting themselves with, trucks that are labeled about who they are and why they're there, and making sure that they're announcing their presence so that, they understand that they're there for a professional reason. The suburban areas, they present a whole different challenge. Those cities are very quick to issue citations and violations. So the cities that they have a little bit more money in their budgets, and so city inspectors are driving around, and as soon as the grass is 13 inches tall, they're very quick to slap up a code violation or a citation. Sure. So you have to be quick to react to those vacant properties and make sure that any exterior vandalism or any exterior neglect is addressed very quickly, because violations and citations come with additional fines. And certainly neighbors in the suburban areas are very quick to call the city and complain about any perceived neglect Sure. at a property. And then the urban areas, they're just a challenge, a whole different challenge. That's when you're seeing, lots of just weird infestations, infestations of bats or snakes, and just, really large lots, mice all over the place and stuff like that. So they take different precautions there at the property. So each one, and just longer to drive to the rural Sure. areas, and, different equipment to maintain those lawns because of how much larger they are and stuff. Mm-hmm.
What's the craziest or most unexpected thing that you guys have encountered while trying to preserve a property?
Oh my gosh. So I've been doing this for over 20 years. And I mean, a week doesn't go by that you don't come across something like, you've got to be kidding me, I've never seen that before. Sure. So many weird things. We come across very odd things all the time. I would say in my tenure, we've seen a basement full of snakes, like hundreds and hundreds of snakes, like up in a ball. God. Almost like National Geographic.
That's crazy.
Just a bunch of snakes. And then we had a creative borrower that didn't want their property to look vacant, so they staged some mannequins inside the living room.
It's like Home Alone.
To make it look like it was occupied. So that was very creative. We see a lot of just really bad homeowner DIY projects.
Did that work at all? Did the mannequins work at all?
It did.
Were they fooled the first time?
It was tricky. I mean, you thought people were living inside until you realized they never really moved. But that took creativity.
So how has property pres changed over the last decade? Are there different tech innovations or automation innovations, or are there things you're seeing coming down the pipeline?
Yeah, technology and data definitely have brought a lot of validity to our industry during my tenure. When I started over 20 years ago, there weren't cost estimating software. We didn't even have digital cameras when I started. It was Polaroids. And that was if you even got a photo when you did an inspection, or if you changed a lock at a property. So it's definitely brought validity. So cost estimating tools that the insurance industry uses became very popular in our industry. So if you had a tree fall on your roof after a hurricane or a storm, the insurance adjuster is going to use software, and they're going to calculate how much it's going to cost for you to hire a general contractor to replace that roof. That software has become standard 101 property preservation rule for us to submit bids to the investors and to the banks. That just has validated our pricing. Prior to using that cost estimating software in the last 10 to 12 years, I think there was an assumption that we just made up our prices and that we were greedy. So that's been super huge. AI and photo recognition is probably the biggest hot topic right now. And that's really cool. It's come a long way. What that does is it can identify damages in a photo or something unique in a photo and get it in front of a team member. Why is that important? Because on an initial secure, when we first walk into that property and we breach the door to go winterize the plumbing and get an idea of what's going on inside the property, we could get 1,000 photos. It's not uncommon to get 1,000 photos. They take a photo of every nook and cranny, every room, every kitchen cabinet, everything you can imagine. And so for a human being to go through 1,000 photos, you're going to miss stuff. So the AI tool says, hey, this photo is important. Like this one, we think we see water damage on a ceiling, or this photo, we think we see mold in a kitchen cabinet. So it pulls that photo out of the thousands that you get and says, look at this photo is important. So that's a game changer. It's really helpful to the team members because I'm sure looking at 1,000 photos gets really redundant and tiring throughout the day. So that's probably the biggest thing right now.
That's really cool. How new is that software?
You know, it's probably been around 3 or 4 years, but it's just getting better. It's definitely getting more refined every single day, and it's getting cooler every day. It's getting more and more accurate, less, false positives.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah. To recap, when a property goes into foreclosure, the foreclosing lender or mortgage holder has certain rights and obligations related to maintaining the property, particularly if it becomes vacant or abandoned. These rights and obligations stem from a mix of contractual terms in the mortgage agreement, as well as local, state, and federal laws. Thanks for joining Kellie Chambers and I on the Weekly Friedman, your source of the most essential information in the default industry. Looking forward to seeing you next time, and thanks for tuning in.